Around the world, everybody, new technologies are opening possibilities to bolster citizen engagement and enable a more fluid, persistent dialogue between citizens and their representatives. Our next speaker will talk about how these technologies can help improve the current state of affairs, promote participation, and make elections more secure, transparent, and affordable. Let us welcome CEO of Smartmatic, Antonio Mugica, as he discusses the future of democracy in the digital era. Ladies and gentlemen, Antonio Mugica.
Well, good morning. I'm going to start today with a little bit of good news. If we could see the first slide, please. The clicker is not working. The world has made amazing progress over the past 200, 100, and actually the last 20 years. One of the key benchmarks, which is extreme poverty, we can see it's been reduced from 90% of the population 200 years ago was in extreme poverty, and today is actually around 10%. Even more importantly, in the past 20 years, extreme poverty was reduced by half across the world. Basic education, now it's almost like a human right. Everyone gets basic education, same with literacy. Vaccination went from absolutely zero, of course, before vaccines were invented, to now having a very significant portion of the population vaccinated. And child mortality, another very, very important benchmark, has been taking massive increases or decreases, and now we're at the lowest level in human history. As you can see, democracy on the top right, however, has had a bit of more of a choppy improvement. We're better than ever, but there's still a little bit of work to be done. And even though in countries that today are not considered full democracies, like for example China, democratic values and democratic sentiment is higher than ever before. In spite of these great advances, these great advances are actually mostly thanks to technology, to trade, and to Enlightenment values. Today, 50% of the world population, or half of the world population, has access to the internet. We have more than 2 billion people using smartphones, which is actually more than half of the adult population. And in Latin America, which I know is an important focus of this conference, you know, Facebook has close to 400 million users. Now, in spite of all this progress, which is great news and for which we as humanity should feel extremely proud, you know, satisfaction and engagement with democracy is probably at an all-time low. Across more than 31 emerging and developing nations, you know, more than half of the population is dissatisfied with democratic institutions and how democracy works. Global turnout in elections is actually going down in everyone, with a few exceptions, or a few countries which are an exception. Even in the developed world, like the United States and Western Europe, turnout tends to be very, very weak in all elections. And less than 50% of the population of the world today trusts in democratic institutions, in government institutions, in NGOs. So clearly, there is a bit of a crisis in this front. And I want to stop here for a second, because this is actually normal. This is to be expected. And when we see the change throughout human history, and when we see technology bringing forward change throughout the past 2,000 years, whenever new technologies came about, a new socioeconomic era came about, and then governance was the last step to join or to reach the same level. This is called the cultural gap. So government institutions, to some extent right now, are obsolete. And the way that we are managing government and we are managing society as a whole is somewhat obsolete. So this is the reason why we see all this dissatisfaction and this kind of friction in the democratic process. So democracy is actually ripe for technological disruption and is already being disrupted. Now, somewhat in a disorganized and disorderly fashion. You know, all these effects of social networking, what we've seen here in the United States, all the chatter and the noise and the confusion around the role of social media, communications, instant communications, Twitter, and all these fears, paranoia, and concerns about hacking, about misinformation, about fake news. All of this is part actually of this transformation from an industrial age onto an information age. My organization is working extremely hard in trying to channel these forces and trying to understand the issues at hand and trying to work on what would be democracy 2.0. There is absolutely no doubt that the future of democracy is digital. And I think what we're seeing is that there needs to be a new kind of dialogue now that we have instant communications, the 4 to 6 year election cycle as the main form of engagement with the political domain is probably completely obsolete. The generation of trust and the ability to read and understand what's happening and differentiate it from the noise that's out there. It's also something that's very, very ready for disruption, and I think we will see many solutions coming forward in the years to come. And very importantly, and something we many times forget, is the conduct of elections. Elections are still across the world done mostly with pen and paper. Here in the United States, it's actually fully automated. It was one of the pioneering countries in the world to bring technology onto the election process, and it's actually pretty widespread. There are other countries like India and like Brazil that are very large democracies that make extensive use of technology to conduct elections, and it has been done for many, many years. However, there are many other countries across the globe that require to bring more technology onto the democratic process and specifically onto elections to make elections more secure, to make elections more transparent, to make them more auditable, and to increase trust, reduce cost, improve the entire democratic process. So conducting better elections is actually a key and core part. It's a cornerstone of what needs to be done in the future. There are many technologies that are being introduced. There are some that are widely tested. And I think we will see more and more of these new technologies, including internet voting, make center stage in the years to come. Internet voting, for example, has had a very successful implementation to which actually I'm very honored my organization was involved with in Estonia. It's a tiny country in Europe, very, very high-tech country, very advanced, one of the pioneers of e-government around the world, and they have been voting on the internet for 10 years. So every citizen in Estonia has the right to either go to a polling station or to stay home and vote from home from his or her computer. In 10 years, the participation on the internet has only increased. So every election, more people choose to vote from the convenience of their own home instead of going to the poll station. In addition to this, in 10 years of voting on the internet, there has never been one security breach. So contrary to all this kind of paranoia and conspiracy theories around security, and don't get me wrong, security is extremely important. It's actually the core of any solution in this field. But the truth is, the track record demonstrates that security is greatly increased and improved when you bring technology to the democratic process. What is to do in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 3 years? Well, again, starting a little bit with good news is 51% of Latin American voters already vote electronically. And the number is that high, in part because Brazil, as I mentioned, is a pioneer, and of course it makes a significant chunk of the Latin American population. However, 7 out of the 9 countries that are going to conduct elections this year are going to use some form of technology at some stage of the election process, be it on the registration side, creating the voters list, be it authenticating voters, making sure that those eligible to vote are the ones that vote, be it on the actual voting act of casting a vote, either using a voting machine or a piece of paper that then gets scanned and counted by a counting machine, or in the consolidation and transmission of the results to a central location so that results can be announced in record time and with as little disruption as possible. So again, I think some of the good news, and specifically for Latin America, is this is already happening. It just needs to keep being nurtured and pushed in the right direction, and of course, taken care of with a focus on security, transparency, and efficiency. Biometric technology will be used, again, in Latin America this year to authenticate close to 100 million voters. And something we're seeing in many countries like Chile, Argentina, and Brazil is we're already seeing participatory budget decisions being made in an iterative process, voting over the internet, capturing the sentiment of people on the internet, and then having these tools actually promote the engagement of the entire population in decision making for something as simple as creating the budget of a county. The other good news is petitions are becoming increasingly popular. Petitions are another form of direct and participatory democracy, and is something that is seen a significant increase. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with this corporation named Change.org, which has turned into a petition platform globally, and its numbers are just increasing and increasing every year, and it's being used every corner of the world, you know, from Canada to Argentina, from Australia to the north of Siberia. So this is something, again, that's happening. The dialogue going forward is not going to be about if technology is going to be in the picture or is not going to be in the picture, if voting technology and engagement technologies and democratic tools to improve democracy are going to be used. The answer is an absolute yes. In spite of, you know, the somewhat misinformation that has been spread about hacking the US election, which was actually never hacked, at least the voting systems were never hacked. What was hacked was the discourse, right? The information, the social media, the spread of false information, also called fake news. But the voting systems themselves were actually never hacked. So what's going to happen now in the future is simply an increase of the use of technology, an increase of the tools for engagement in the democratic process. Experiments are going across the world, and I think the participation of each and every one of you in your different fields, the engagement of each and every one of you as citizens in using these tools, in using these platforms, in using these technologies will only increase and will make them better and will help them evolve onto what will become the real democracy 2.0, which has not yet been invented, but we're all together in the process of creating. Thank you very much.
In my pockets, kicking these rocks, it's kinda hard to watch this life go by. I'm buying into skeptics, man.
That was Antonio Mugica from Smartmatic.